Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. With the mid-month, Madelyne got her tier 4. So in this video, I'm going to be taking a look at how much she improves at level 80 and tier 4 in PvE content, and basically how to deal with her in PvP content, considering that now she is essentially meta. So I'll be taking a look at how you can potentially counter her in Timeline and Alliance Conquest, and to show you how powerful she now is in Otherworld Battle. Considering that Madelyne's value in War Boss Legend is going to be a little bit low due to her restrictions that she has access to, and because there are better options available in things like ABX and ABL, I'll mostly just be covering the improvement that she gets going from 70 to 80 and then tier 4. But obviously her true value is going to be in PvP, which is what most of the video is going to be focused on. If you remember from before, at level 70 she was able to clear stage 39 of Null with about 2 minutes and 15 seconds left. With the level 80 upgrade, she shaves off about 1 minute and 20 seconds from this clear. Because that stage is pretty low for a level 80 character, I went up to stage 54 and she was able to complete that in about 2 minutes and 30 seconds, or with about the same amount of time left over. Once I get the tier 4, I'm able to complete the stage about 30 seconds faster, but because the stage was cleared so quickly and it's still kind of low for a tier 4 character, even if I don't have a damage proc, it's not really truly representative of the amount of improvement she gets. You'll see that in the later stages or the harder War Boss Legend stages. On Mephisto stage 49, she previously cleared it with about 50 seconds left. Then at level 80 she gets a huge 2 minute and 10 second improvement, and at T4 she gets about a 50 second improvement even further. Versus Ultron on stage 29, at level 70 she was able to basically complete it with no time left. Again, you can see how huge of an improvement the level 80 alone makes, since I was able to clear this stage about 3 minutes faster. The T4 upgrade doesn't seem to be nearly as significant, since I was only able to improve the clear time by another 40 seconds. On stage 20 of Gore, I'm almost able to complete the stage similar to the Ultron one with almost no time left. At level 80, that clear time improves by well over 2 minutes. You can see that I previously did a stage 20 and this is a stage 34, so the clear time improvement is likely closer to 3 minutes, similar to how it was on the Ultron stage. Because this stage is tougher, you can get a clear representation of how much of an improvement the tier 4 makes, and in this case it's about 1 minute and 20 seconds. I'm not entirely sure if my metrics are kind of off, but the character seems pretty good at level 80. I was able to take her into a stage 14 of Kang, and she was able to complete that with about 1 minute and 30 seconds left. I'm not entirely sure how many characters at level 80 with no damage proc can do this stage, so that's why I said that the character seems kind of good. And again, you can see that at tier 4, the upgrade is decent for her, since it shaves off about anywhere from 1 minute or more from the clear time. The stat bump with her tier 4 is pretty significant. She gains about 20,000 energy attack increase and well over 20,000 HP increase. Her instinct stat also pretty much doubles with the tier 4 upgrade, going from around 2,000 to well over 4,000 when you upgrade her. In terms of the striker to use for her, for PvP, it would probably be any of the ones that have iframe ignore in their skill, regardless if the instinct type doesn't match. So that would be characters like Spider-Man, Hulk, Ghost Rider, Wolverine, and Jean Grey. It's kind of the same deal in PvE. You don't necessarily have to have the instinct types match, and most of the times characters like Thor and Ghost Rider will end up dealing the most damage as strikers, though if you do want to end up also matching the instinct type, Loki is a pretty decent option since he is also Destruction Instinct. The rotation for her is the same as before, so you do a 6 delay cancel, 3 delay cancel, 5 delay cancel, 4, and you would just use the T4 skill whenever it's available. And again, you would also use the 1 and 2 skills when those are available to fill up the ultimate and tier 4 faster. You can definitely see that the level 80 and tier 4 upgrade made a significant difference in her performance in Giant Boss Raid. She's basically able to solo the fight in about 2 minutes and 40 seconds. So with a damage proc, that would probably shave off about 1 minute. So being able to clear the entire fight within about 2 minutes is actually pretty good for the character. In ABX, I was able to score around 10 million when she was level 70, and for the female villain restriction, with the tier 4, I'm able to score about 2 million more with her, or a little bit over 12 million, and with the damage proc, I'm pretty sure that I could hit around 13 or 14 million with her pretty easily. However, she still doesn't compete with Jean, since Jean can hit around 13 or 14 million without a damage proc, and well over that with a damage proc. You also have to keep in mind that Jean also has a uniform, and her kit just performs better in ABX since she can just quick cancel all of her skills, whereas Madelyne doesn't have a uniform and you have to sort of delay cancel her skills. Madelyne doesn't really have any days that she satisfies for the ABL restrictions, so I used her for the no restrictions day and was able to score around 5.3 million with her, which is pretty decent, but again, she won't really have any value in this mode since not only does she not satisfy any restrictions, but there are better options for those. Either way, I'm showing her performance in the PvE modes, since newer accounts that end up building her before other characters might get some additional value in these specific modes using her. On the PvP side, when you get the character to tier 4, there isn't really too much extra to cover. You saw previously that she did really well at level 70, and when you get her to tier 4, she is essentially able to beat any meta in the game in PvP. With her tier 4 and her artifact, the character is now essentially in the top 3 to 5 best meta characters for timeline and other PvP modes. The one thing I forgot to mention in the last video was that for players who are able to enter into Timeline Challenger, the character won't really have any value there because you can get buffs and things that pretty much nullify the Immortal Artifact outright. So without that, the character loses the majority of her value and there are other characters that are better than her. A lot of people compare Madelyne to Jean since she is basically her clone, and in PvP she does end up outperforming her and beating her in a 1 vs 1 situation. However, you have to keep in mind that Madelyne is a blast type, so versus characters like Spider-Man and other speed types, she does have a disadvantage versus them, and sometimes or oftentimes will end up being countered by them. She can still end up beating those characters because her kit is so good, and especially if you have her artifact, since she can keep rotating into her 4th skill to lock down the opponents, or using that iframe ignore counter to kind of pull them out of their iframes. However, versus speed types specifically, Jean does have the upper hand versus her because she has that universal typing. I did mention in the previous video that it's possible that when she got her tier 4 upgrade and that stat bump, that a CTP of Conquest could end up outperforming something like a Mighty Authority or a Brilliant Authority. And I would say that from the testing I've done and from the results I've seen from other players, that those CTPs are still pretty much on par with one another. For the most part, something like a Brilliant Authority makes the character more standalone, where you don't really need a support for her to excel, since she can cap out that damage reduction to close to 100% by herself. Whereas if you use something like Conquest, Mighty, or Brilliant, she can perform well by herself, but usually she performs much better and is really tankier if you have a support. So that is kind of the main difference between those two builds. Either of the CTPs are viable, and in terms of the overall performance, it really depends on the team that you use with her. At the Brilliant level, both Authority and Conquest are ideal. However, at the Mighty level, I would probably say that if you have the character at tier 4, a Mighty Conquest would probably exceed a Mighty Authority, since you have that extra stat bump to help with the healing and everything else, and because you won't really be able to hit that max damage mitigation or damage reduction when you have the Mighty Steel Authority. This doesn't mean that the Mighty Authority is far inferior and a bad option for her, it's just that the Mighty Conquest might perform a little bit better for her when you get her to tier 4 and have the additional healing and additional health to help with the survival. Once you add in support to the mix, those two CTPs don't end up being too far from one another, since you can potentially get that maximum damage reduction in a sense with the Mighty Authority and support. You can see that she easily goes through any meta character, including herself, but some of the characters that she ends up struggling a little bit against are Wolverine and Adam Warlock, and the main reason for that is because she seems to have issues with characters that can stay in very long iframes, considering that she needs to do her iframe ignore counter, and that counter actually needs to trigger and hit the opponent. But in that period of time when she is waiting for that skill to be used, or when she doesn't have it available, she is losing a lot of her health from the opponent staying in their own iframe and just cutting down her health. One thing to note about Madelyne is that even though she is quite strong for PvP, if you're facing her on manual, she isn't really that difficult to take down. The main reason for this is because she is dependent on that iframe ignore counter skill to actually trigger, to be able to hit you and do a lot of damage, and you know that because her AI opens with that skill, you can basically avoid it triggering off the start, and then attack her once you see that skill animation is kind of done, so you know she can't counter you. There is the chance that she can have the skill back up to hit you while you've basically taken down her first life, but at that point you can basically just finish her off with the same character, either having your own revive if you end up dying, or if you don't end up dying, that's basically just the character dead right there. You can see from these multiple clips the various characters that you can use and the strategy that you can employ, as well as the timing to avoid her skills. So you can see that you can use characters like Gore, you can use Jean, Spider-Man, even Wolverine. And if you aren't really sure of the timing right off the start, you can potentially also switch characters to avoid any damage at the beginning. In Timeline, you can kind of avoid some of her kit on manual and she might not seem as strong there, but in modes that are completely auto, like Alliance Conquest, Alliance Tournament, and Otherworld Battle, you can see just how powerful she is with that immortal effect. You can see in this clip that she was in some ways able to solo both Wolverine and Jean Grey with that Colossus support, but I obviously did have the help of Rachel using her burst from the Awakening skill. This will probably be a decent team-up option for her, using Rachel to basically activate the revive or immortal effect of the opponent before they do the same to you. Because the character is meta and quite powerful with her immortal artifact, I thought it was more important to show potential counters versus her. So one of those is to use Spider-Man to try to activate her artifact right off the start, and then using a character like Adam Warlock to be able to survive long enough to basically take her out and the rest of the team, especially if players use Wolverine to try to protect Madelyne from speed types. If you're trying to save Spider-Man and Adam Warlock to counter other sets, one of the other characters that I found works pretty well versus Madelyne was Thanos. Even when I tested Thanos or tested against him in Timeline, he seemed to do pretty decently versus her. I think it's mostly because he has a lot of long iframes where he just sits there and has those kind of like farm AoE effects drop, and then when he does his iframe ignore, he basically just locks down the opponent while he's attacking, so it's possible that Madelyne can't use her own counter iframe ignore in that same time to just burst him down very quickly. You do have to take that team with a grain of salt, since I haven't tested enough to guarantee that it is consistent. But I also included this, or the rest of this fight, just because I thought it was pretty interesting that I was able to beat the counter team at the bottom that just hard counters Thanos and Hela. One character that I thought would do pretty well against her is Ghost Rider, because he also has Immortal, and he gains that insane damage versus villain types, so he's able to activate the First Life, or the Immortal artifact versus Madelyne, but the issue is that he can't really solo by himself most times, because he doesn't iframe enough and he'll just get locked down by Madelyne even after his immortal artifact activates. So similar to the Adam Warlock Spider-Man counter, you kind of have to pair him up with another meta character that will be able to survive and deal enough damage to Madelyne to take out her second life or post-immortal artifact proc. The other interesting thing that I mentioned previously was that Madelyne is pretty susceptible to opponents that have long iframes, and most interestingly in this clip, characters that have invisibility. Sometimes invisible characters aren't really qualified as iframe characters, so she won't really activate the iframe ignore counter skill on them, and you can see that in this particular instance. Even though you would think Ancient One would use her reflect to take out Madelyne, she actually just stays in her invisibility skill and some of the iframe skills and whittles down Madelyne that way instead of reflecting damage back to her. So using that knowledge of long iframes and having a type advantage versus her, I used Gwen and was able to beat her because I not only had the type advantage to give her extra damage reduction as well as extra damage, but I also used Colossus to even increase the damage reduction further, as well as the fact that I have a CTP of authority with the steal effect on Gwen, so she is really difficult to take down while she is dealing a lot of damage and able to burn down the immortal artifact as well as her second life or post-immortal proc. I didn't really test her out too much in Otherworld Battle. It's pretty clear that that is her best mode, considering that she can survive long enough to activate her T4 as well as just lock down opponents with her large AoE skills and counter them with the iframe ignore counter that also has a large AoE, does a lot of burst damage, and also locks them down. So my overall review of the character hasn't changed too drastically with her getting her tier 4. I sort of assumed that she would also get that reflect effect similar to Jean. However, she got one where she gets additional healing for damage she deals. Unfortunately, this isn't really too great because most times you want her survival to improve based on the damage that she takes, as opposed to the damage that she deals, because she can heal from the 20% off the various skills that she has, just activating those. However, you want the extra healing when you're taking damage so that you would actually heal when you can't use skills. Because of this and the way that you can kind of dodge her AI on manual, she isn't really in the top spot for timeline, but is definitely really strong there and in the top 3 to 5 spots. However, in things like Alliance Conquest, Alliance Tournament, and Otherworld Battle is where she is the strongest and potentially in the top 3, because she has that immortal artifact and she can survive long enough to activate that T4 skill, which a lot of other characters don't really have the opportunity to do. If you're trying to build up a top meta character for PvP and you still don't have Adam Warlock, I would highly advocate getting him first, because he is just as strong, if not stronger, than Madelyne, because he can kind of dodge her attacks by staying in iframes, but he is, I believe, still cheaper than her, considering that you also don't need his artifact, and you can basically make him work with any kind of CTP or build, since he has built-in guard break immunity. Even though I think Madelyne is a really strong character for PvP with her artifact, considering that she still doesn't have a uniform, I would still advocate that people build up Jean, Wolverine, and Adam Warlock first, just because of the sheer value that they give, given their cost. However, with that said, if you already have those characters built up, Madelyne is a very strong addition to a PvP-centered account, and will definitely dominate things like Otherworld Battle for a long period of time if she isn't hard banned or has those kind of soft bans in place, and is a very strong addition for things like Alliance Conquest and probably Alliance Tournament. That pretty much covers Madelyne with her tier 4. She's only going to get stronger if she gets uniform, but that is a big if. She could potentially compete for the top first or second spot with that uniform, but it really just depends on the uniform and if she actually does get that, and also whether other metas emerge before she gets those upgrades. Anyways, I hope you found this video helpful, maybe to decide whether you want to build her or how you want to build her, but if you do find the video useful, please consider liking and subscribing, possibly sharing it with others. If you have questions, you can also leave those in the comments. I always appreciate people taking the time to watch my videos, so thank you, but the video is now over.